If you're a player who lives for the goofy archetypes, there's no way you can skim through them without recognizing the Ojamas. This Speedo-wearing trio have had their faces in the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG from being Chazz's underrated powerhouse in Yu-Gi-Oh GX to being designed in a goofy artwork all throughout Yu-Gi-Oh. They're so funny that even their success in the meta is something to laugh at. So let's see why the Ojamas flopped in the TCG. If you want to know the first reason they didn't succeed in the TCG, look no further than what their main deck monsters were. Debuting in Invasion of Chaos, Ojama Black, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Green are the stale bread and melted butter of the deck. They all have the same stat line, level, attribute, and type, level 2 light beast normal monsters with 0 attack and 1000 defense. When they're together, something magical happens. One of those things being the spell card Ojama Delta Hurricane. If you have Ojama Black, Yellow, and Green face up on your side of the field, you can destroy all cards your opponent controls. The last card is Ojama Trio. This normal trap card spawned 3 Ojama tokens with the same stat lines as the Ojama monsters to your opponent's side of the field. They couldn't be used for tribute summons, and when they were destroyed, the opponent takes 300 damage. While looking at these cards, you can just assume that these are all unplayable, and you would most likely be correct. Surprisingly, one of these cards did see play, and it even appeared on the Forbidden and Limited list. Ojama Trio was actually seen as a threatening card due to degenerate burn decks and OTKs. Not only was Chain Strike Burn running around, but it was also seen use in all-out attacks OTKs, giving your opponent the trio tokens and forcing them to attack your monsters, most of the time being Stone Statue of the Aztecs. Aztecs doubled any damage your opponent took when battling it. Since the tokens had 0 attack, anytime they swung into it, your opponent would take a guaranteed 4,000 damage per token, which meant your opponent would take 12,000 damage altogether. So, OTK seems obvious, but what if I told you this card was also a solid meta call? Due to certain situations, Ojama Trio could hinder boards in certain scenarios. Having decks that tribute and need multiple pieces like Guildford, you can give them the trio tokens to take up their space for their pendulum summoning and limit how much they can summon. Cyber Dragon being special summoned, Ojama Trio in your opponent's turn to stop that inherent summon. It was even considered a tech choice matchup against Burning Abyss. Since BA monsters get destroyed if there's another monster other than a BA monster on the controller's side of the field, they are destroyed instantly. So you can just place those on the field and completely shut down your opponent's game plan. This card was so underrated that it was already on the ban list in 2008, being limited to a 1 copy due to its OTK potential, and brought to 2 in 2010, and finally given its release papers 7 years later, where it doesn't see any play. So the Ojama Trio were a menace, but only trap card wise. The vanillas weren't so lucky due to being, well, vanillas. Unless you were rocking over 1900 attack and a level 4, those bland yellow cards didn't see play. As great as having a board wipe like Ojama Delta Hurricane was, the setup would be slow due to having to normal summon the trio, and then due to them not having protection from simply being removed from the board. Also, there were no searches for them yet. More on that later. But they did get a new monster, a boss monster at that a little bit later. In Soul of the Duelists, the world would see the king of speedos, Ojama King. This level 6 light beast fusion with 0 attack and 3000 defense took the whole Ojama trio as a fusion material. Its effect lets you select up to 3 monster zones, and as long as King remains face up on the field, those zones can't be used. While it's always nice to receive a boss monster for your archetype, that doesn't mean it was beneficial. In this case, Ojama King was more of a mediocre and lackluster card. Sure, making 3 zones unplayable can become a hindrance for your opponent, but it doesn't really stop people from playing the game. It just limits the resources they can place on the field. It also required specific materials for you to make the Ojama King. Obtaining specific fusion materials was always an issue for old school fusions, and with King this was no exception. With no consistent way to get the Ojama Gang, it was nigh impossible to make King consistently. The major issue was also that the Ojamas had 0 attack on all their cards, including their boss monster. What good are these effects if you can't do major damage to your opponent? So, while occupying your opponent's zones seemed to be their specialty, their lack of playability in every other department kind of hampered them. That didn't change when the Elemental Energy gave them new support too. Ojama Muscle was a normal spell card that lets you select one Ojama King and destroy all other Ojama monsters on the field. The selected Ojama King gains 1000 attack for each Ojama monster destroyed by this effect. Also, they gained a Searcher and Ojama Magic, a normal spell that when it's sent from the field or hand to the grave, you can add one Ojama yellow, black, and green from your deck to your hand. Both cards had exactly what Ojamas needed, but both came with weird drawbacks. Ojamuscle was the solution for finally having an attack increase, but it needed resources, aka Ojama monsters, for you to get said increase. This was already a tough hill to climb because you'd most likely already use the resources to make Ojama King, since it took 3 Ojamas to make. It's highly unlikely there'd be monsters left over to get an increase unless your opponent controls Ojama monsters. In that case, you would have been running Ojamas or be stuck with your Ojama tokens. Ojama Magic also completed the woes of Ojama support. It was the Searcher that got you all 3 of the Ojama trio, but the card depended on being sent to the graveyard in some other way. This meant you had to waste resources to pop it yourself, or even worse, wait for your opponent to get rid of it. So it was a search you couldn't even do by yourself. The support was hit with unnecessary requirements that made them near unplayable, which, ironically, accurately depicts what Ojamas were. So unless this was Yu-Gi-Oh GX, you didn't hear anything about Ojamas. It wasn't until Tactical Evolution that Ojamas got another playable card. Adding more to the fusion aspect of Ojama was Ojama Knight. This level 5 beast fusion with 0 attack and 2500 defense takes only 2 Ojama monsters as its fusion materials. Knight lets you select up to 2 monster zones and essentially do the same thing as King, making those zones unavailable for your opponent to use. Knight was a really solid fusion target. It just needed 2 Ojamas and wasn't specific about which of the Ojama trio to use. It was also a level 5 fusion, making it an instant fusion target if you're in a pinch. It even paired better with Ojama Trio, as Knight only took up 2 spaces, unlike King who took up 3. This guarantees that if you pair it with Ojama Trio, you would get all 3 tokens. However, it still suffered from being 0 attack and having no protection. Outside of that, Knight probably ranks as one of the best supports for our Speedo weirdos. Now it was just the issue of how to fix up the search and attack power of the archetype. Once again, they gave unique support to help with both of these problems in the TCG set Raging Battle. In Raging Battle, 3 new pieces of support were given. Let's start off with Ojama Blue, a level 2 light beast effect monster with the same stat lines as all the other Ojamas. If this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, you can add 2 Ojama cards from your deck to your hand. Ojama Red was next. When you normal summon it, you can special summon up to 4 Ojama monsters from your hand. Finally, players were introduced to Ojama Country, a field spell. Once per turn, you can send an Ojama card from your hand to the grave to special summon an Ojama monster from your graveyard. While you control an Ojama monster, the attack and defense of all monsters on the field are switched. Analysis. These cards actually boosted the archetype very significantly. Ojama Blue was a good searcher at this time of the game when the battle phase was heavily utilized. With cards like Giant Rat, Mystic Tomato, and Sandgam being around during the time, the game was slower. Nobody blinked an eye at Ojama Blue being heavily utilized. That's also on top of the fact that it can grab any Ojama monster from your deck and add it to your hand. It was even errata to be able to add Ojamuscle later on in the TCG, giving you access to every card associated with Ojama. Red helped with making sure your Ojama monsters didn't get stuck in your hand, finally ending your suffering of playing one vanilla Ojama at a time. Ojama Country was a solution to the attack power woes. Playing an Ojama immediately swapped everyone's attack and defense. This included your fusions, who, when Ojama Country is active on the field, become scary juggernauts with high attack power. The effect to special summon from the graveyard just sweetened the pot, as it could special summon an Ojama monster from the grave, including your fusions if they're destroyed. The effect was also a soft once per turn, meaning you can use the effect if you played another Ojama Country on top of the first one. It also combos well with Ojama Magic. Since it just requires you to discard an Ojama card, Ojama Magic would be used as a cost. You could pitch Ojama Magic, add yellow, green, and black to set up a summon with Ojama Red, and play the Ojamas in your hand to hopefully Delta Hurricane your opponent to smithereens. Were they good now? Absolutely not. They still had tons of flaws. Blue needed to be destroyed by battle, and it needed to be sent to the graveyard. So if floodgates like Dimensional Fissure or Macrocosmos are active, your best searcher is just shut down. This can also apply to Ojama Country, as the card has to be sent to the graveyard to use its special summon effect. Lastly, Red's effect was only triggered by normal summoning it. But the major gripe is that by the time they got this support, the deck had already been power crept out and was too easy to interrupt. With powerhouses like Lightsworns, Teledad, and Blackwings running around, none of these decks were scared by an Ojama board that took a couple of turns to set up. Also, their token Monster Zone blocking scheme was easily busted due to the introduction of synchros. While they were good for stopping tributes, they weren't so great for stopping synchros, as they could be used as synchro material. And since they only inflicted damage by being destroyed, the controller could take no damage using them to make a synchro. You were more likely to be thanked by your opponent than cursed by them by giving them free resources. So, by the time Circuit Break came out, you would think Konami would create more Ojama token cards. And you would think wrong. Ojama Duo was their next token creating normal trap instead. Instead of 3 tokens, however, this one would give your opponent 2. They, like Ojama Trio tokens, couldn't be tributed and inflicted 300 damage to your opponent when they were destroyed. Duo also has a graveyard effect. During either player's turn, except the turn it's sent to the grave, you can banish this card to special summon 2 Ojama monsters with different names from your deck. Duo was basically the same as Trio, meaning that it also has the same problems as well. The only saving grace was that it lets you get 2 Ojama monsters from your deck. Other than that, it was just giving away free tokens for synchro summoning. Not to mention that Link Summoning was introduced to the game around this time, alongside the extra Monster Zone, now giving a whopping 6 zones for your opponent to use. Since Trio and Duo tokens can't take up the extra Monster Zone, your opponent could just link their way out of the Monster Zone lock if they needed to. So their plan was outdated and power crept, so they weren't seen as a threat. They would need a new identity if they wanted to see some sort of play. And that's exactly what Konami did when they debuted the new support for them in Legendary Duelist Ancient Millennium set. Ojama Simulation was a normal spell card where you can reveal 1 Light Machine Fusion monster from your extra deck, and then banish any number of Ojama monsters from your hand, face-up field, and or graveyard to special summon fusion materials with different names whose names are specifically listed on the card you revealed from your hand, deck, and or graveyard, equal to the number of monsters banished to activate the effect. You can also banish this card from your graveyard, then target 3 of your banished Ojama monsters, shuffle them into the deck, and then draw 1 card. Oja Match is a quick play spell that sends 1 Ojama card from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard to add to your hand 1 Ojama monster with a different name, and 1 armed dragon monster from your deck and or graveyard. Then, immediately after the effect resolves, you normal summon one of those monsters. During your main phase, you can banish this card from your grave to target 3 of your banished Ojama monsters, shuffle them into the deck, and then draw 1 card. The final card in Legendary Duelist was Ojama Pajama. If armed dragon monsters and or light machine fusion monsters you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish 1 Ojama card from your hand, face-up field, or graveyard instead. It also has additional effects you can activate once per turn. You can add 1 Ojama card from your deck to your hand, then discard 1 card during your main phase, or special summon as many of your banished Ojama monsters as possible when this card is sent to the graveyard. Analysis. Weird turn, right? It's a wild 180 to go from zone occupying focus to now armed dragon and light fusion monsters. If you watch Yu-Gi-Oh GX, you know the reason why. The armed dragon monsters and alphabet fusions were all part of Chazz Princeton's deck, the same duelist who also used the Ojamas in his deck. How he didn't brick is anyone's guess. So, for casual fun and anime references, these cards were made to tie them together. It's also meant to help you make the fusion Armed Dragon Catapult Cannon, a level 10 light machine fusion with an insane requirement, needing Armed Dragon level 7 plus VWXYZ Dragon Catapult Cannon. It's not like the new Ojama support were bad cards either. They had really good effects. Ojama Simulation literally could get you fusion material for ease for your alphabet fusion, and Oja Match grabbed your Armed Dragon cards. They were also non-once per turn cards if you had multiple, and easily recycled your Ojama monsters. You know what else was easy? Not playing this at all. This playstyle is the definition of too many cooks in the kitchen. Not only did you have the Ojama Vanillas as bricks, but you also had the Armed Dragon and Alphabet Machines as bricks as well. Armed Dragon and Alphabets also already operated better on their own. Armed Dragon had a retrain line and could just operate with generic dragon support. Alphabets were a little different, using the ABC alphabet machines instead of the XYZ ones because the effects were more powerful and didn't need to worry about consistent breaking with the vanilla machines. There was no point in mixing Ojamas and having a greater chance at bricking your opening hand. In Duel Overlord, a plethora of archetypes were included to get their own links. In a random turn of events, one of them was for the Ojamas. Ojama Emperor was a Link 3 light beast with 0 attack and took 2+ beast monsters, including an Ojama monster. While Ojama Country is in the field zone, this card gains 3000 attack, and it cannot be destroyed by card effects. Your opponent takes any battle damage you would have taken from attacks on this card instead. Once per turn, you can target one non-Link Ojama monster in your graveyard and special summon it, but for the rest of the turn, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck except for fusion monsters. Emperor wasn't really anything to write home about. It was nothing more than another body that could reach 3k, revive an Ojama, and had protection from being destroyed by card effects. The fusion locking in a Link format meta didn't help its case either, as it didn't help the outdated style of Ojama. Outside of Ojama's Link, this didn't improve the playstyle of Ojamas. Our last piece of Ojama support comes in as Ojama Pink. This stunning work of art has an effect that lets you activate an effect to let both players draw one card, then discard a card when it's sent from your field or hand to the graveyard. If you discard an Ojama card with this effect, you get to select an opponent's unused monster zone, and until the end of your opponent's turn, they cannot use the selected zone. Right back to square one with the Ojamas. While being able to draw is nice, the outdated attempt to block off your opponent's zones just didn't hold up, especially if it's only temporary. It does have the fun fact of being the only main deck Ojama monster with a hard once per turn. Other than these two facts, this card doesn't really do much to help Ojama. And this wraps up our thorough research on Ojama. What can we take away from all of this? Let's be serious, it doesn't take a scientist or even a Yu-Gi-Oh player to realize this archetype was never supposed to be good. From designs to effects, we knew this deck wasn't topping any YCSs. This is an archetype you take to your locals just to be the weird dude yelling, "Let's Chazz it up." However, if you wanted to see this as competitive for whatever reason, then hopefully this video has successfully laid your claim to rest. None of these mechanics scream viable in this day and age. Making monster zones unavailable is just too slow and wonky of a mechanic. Not to mention that your opponent can still play spells and traps, which, to be honest, are the more dangerous resources of the deck in most cases. Your boss monsters don't have any protection to be removed, whether it's by destruction, banishment, or even being bounced back to the hand or extra deck. The one card that had success, Ojama Trio, was lucky to even be part of a fragile OTK, and a unique meta call to one of the best decks in the mid-2010s against Burning Abyss. Even then, that doesn't work in today's game, where giving your opponents tokens is seen more as a resource than a hindrance. With synchros and links being a commodity in most extra decks, there's no way to keep a consistent monster zone lock. The whole archetype would need a retrain, if anything, to be a good deck. However, Ojamas don't look like they're intended for good play, but more for good moments. So at best, all we can do is just enjoy them for what they are, and pray Konami just releases Ojama Duo as a real card already. Ojama successfully and intentionally makes it into the Hall of Fail.